the panel discussion on the outcome and action post CBD COP16. It is my honor to invite YB Minister to the stage, accompanied by our esteemed panelists and moderator. Please welcome to the stage. With that, I'm handing over the stage to our Mr. Moderator, Mr. Lonnie Angong, the Director General of the Department of Biosafety. If you're ready, you can start. Mr. Lonnie, the floor is yours.
Sound test. All right. Thank you, Madam MC, for the brief introductions of this panel of discussion that we have this morning. Right. Before we start, I guess it is only right and imperative for us to introduce our panel of discussion, our distinguished. Probably it's not in an order of the sequence from left to right, or I shall introduce in brief. His Excellency, YB Yang Berhormat, Nik Nazmi, Nik Sahmat, the Minister of Natural Resource and Environmental Sustainability. I guess that will be the introduction that I have for YB. He's very famous, no worries on that. The second one that I have would be, which is to my left or your right, Yang Berbahagia Prof. Datuk Dr. Mazlin Mokhtar, currently serve as a Deputy Head of Research and the Director of the Ecological System Program Science Panel for Southeast Asia at the United Nations Sustainable Development Solution Network, or in short, UNSDSN, Asia headquarters, hosted by Sunway University. Experience-wise, his experience in environmental sustainability spent over many years across multiple fields, including appointments as an international atomic energy agency, IAEA Research Fellow at the Marine Environment Laboratory in Monte Carlo, Monaco. So that is a great achievement, definitely, for all of us here. And area of research, among others, in pollutants matters on the corals, that includes the mercury levels. And of course, recently, it's been appointed as a co-chair at the Science Panel for Borneo, Southeast Asia, focusing on biodiversity protection and sustainable development. So, quite a very rich CVs, I would say, right? And moving on to the next one, which is to YB's left, Dr. June Rubis. Again, is also a highly, I would put it as a decorated advocate, promoter, we call it a championer, campaigner, as far as the NGOs is concerned, be it in a local, regional, and global efforts. Zooming into biodiversity conservation, climate change, and indigenous issues. She has represented Malaysian Coalition for Indigenous People, or in Bahasa, if I may, Jaringan Orang Asli se-Malaysia, or JOAS, as a term it, as well as an indigenous and local community on conserved area, ICCA Consortium regionally, as well as in the global context. Right. She's also been a co-chair for this ICCA Consortium. She is also serving as a global consultant in United Nations Office for Project Services, UNOP. and United Nations Development Programs, or UNDP, headquarters and as co-founded for the Building Indigenous Initiative in Heritage in Kuching, Sarawak. So again, very rich. And last and not least, I'm trying to make it informal so that it's lively. Otherwise, I might see some heads nodded, simply because you're so focused in our discussion. Right. Last and not least, Mr. Shaikh Mozari Shaikh Hazari, also another active promoter as far as biodiversity is concerned, and currently he's serving as a senior manager, Nature and Biodiversity Center of Excellence for Petronas. Experience again in environmental policy, and currently is also serving as an interim chair of the Malaysia Platform for Business and Biodiversity, MPBB, endorsed by our Ministry of Natural Resource and Environment, or NRES for that matter. Right, and lastly, he's also a member of Extended Consultative Network and ECN on mainstreaming of biodiversity of this CBD, and lead author at the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Diversity and Ecosystem, IBES, for the periods up to end of this year, or 2025, 2025. And again, been meeting him in Cali. He also is involved in the drafting of the first strategic roadmap and action plan for Malaysian businesses to implement the global biodiversity framework at the national level in order to support national policy for biological diversity, NBPD 2022 until 2030. Right. Now, that would be a brief talk. Should I have a round of applause? Otherwise, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Now, what we have here, how to go about in brief, panelists, is that we'll be having 3 questions that will be posed, and each probably will have the first, around 20 minutes altogether, and we shall have this session come to an end roughly in 12:10. Yeah? So bear with us, as we embark into this journey, as pointed out my previous colleagues, about the achievement or the comes to conclusions of this CBD COP16 in Colombia. Right? As the Colombian said, buenos días. So we shall start it with today's discussion. May I start it with His Excellency first? Right. The first question probably is a straightforward, but then again is a deep thoughts of what has transpired in Cali. So this question first goes to His Excellency Yang Berhormat. The first question is about Malaysia has a statement been published or been made by His Excellency during the Cali COP16, delivering in terms as a crucial aspect of YB's presence, I would say. In fact, YB's presence meaning to say reflecting on our Malaysia stand at the CBD COP16. Right. Probably can share with us what would be the key or the essence of the Malaysia statement that YB has pronounced or announced in Kalis. To you, YB.
Yeah, Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera, very good morning. I think when we went to Cali, I think the most important message is to reiterate our what we have in Malaysia, but also our responsibility. And this is something that even many Malaysians, I think, we do not realize. You know, we are a small country, as in terms of geographical size, in terms of population, but we are able to host 1/5 of all the known animal species in the world. We are part, if you go to Sabah, it's part of the Coral Triangle, which is among the richest areas in terms of marine biodiversity. We have forests which are over 100 million years old, older than the Amazon or older than the Congo. So I think we would like to think that we should behave as a biodiversity superpower. And Malaysia played a big role, whether from the government side or from the civil society side, even at Rio in 1992. And I think people of my generation, I like to say this, but again, it shows how what my age is that, you know, there was even a character in Captain Planet, which is actually modeled from a Malaysian activist who was there at Rio, right? But of course, the younger people wouldn't know about this. So when we went there, I think the team, the ministry, the team that I have, they've been able to do very well. You know, we've been able to show our commitment to 𝐏𝐚𝐬𝐿, the 𝐏𝐚𝐬𝐿 Global Framework. We have, you know, as mentioned, we have put it in our own national biodiversity policy. And I think people have seen, as acknowledged by the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, that the deforestation rates, specifically Malaysia, Colombia, Indonesia, Brazil, has actually slowed down significantly. And I think we want to reiterate this message, right? So it shows that we have made a lot of progress, but obviously, you know, there needs to be more support, there needs to be more acknowledgement from the world, because it's not an easy task. Malaysia, we still have pockets of poverty, although we are a high middle income country. We still need development. People still need to earn a living. So how do we go about that in a way that is sustainable, in a way that do not impinge on what we have? So that was our message, I think, at COP16, and also that the fact that we are leveraging with our indigenous community through community ranges and other efforts. So I think those are the things that we were trying to showcase at COP16, and I think you know, it was widely acknowledged during the conference.
All right, thank you, Yang Berhormat, on the message. Again, we need to appreciate what it means. I'm able to just, not to say re-emphasize what YB has mentioned earlier, is that our nation is among one of the mega diverse when it comes to biodiversity. So we should appreciate what we have, and not just at this moment of time, but the manners of how we are able to sustain the biodiversity in order for the next generation to appreciate it further, just as much as we have been passed down to us, current, the now, in terms of time, that we should appreciate it and pass it on to the young. So again, it is not been appreciated much, but the level of awareness, I'm sure YB has done a lot of efforts, going actively, campaigning, as well as giving a level of public awareness and education, cutting all across our generations. That's we'll continue the next level of it, but I shall move on to the next panels that I have here. All right, probably we start with, just now was gentlemen, so probably the one and only ladies in this panel. So yes, Dr. June Rubis. The question that we have here, the first question that I shall put it for the purpose of this discussion. Again, you were there, I'm sure, Doctor. Probably most of us were there, and hearing the historic moments of the panel, plenary, approving, agreeing to the proposal of setting up IPLC, or under this Article 8 𝐿𝐴𝐺𝐸𝐿. right? Okay, I should put it here. Parties adopted a new program of works on Article 8Js and other provisions of the Convention related to indigenous people and local community, as well as establishment of statutory body in terms of recognizing and supporting a PLC in short. So what's your take, and probably you're able to share with us how significant is that after the long, not to say struggle, but the long journey towards being recognized, and it is a landmark. So congratulations, will be another round of applause. Finally at COP16 has been come into a realization. Yes, Dr. June, the floor is yours to further explain and deliberate on that matters.
Thank you, Mr. Lorani. Selamat pagi all, your ambassador and the minister. I think I want to start off with actually thanking the Malaysian delegation. No, I think outside the delegation, perhaps no one really knows this, but you also played a big part in the establishment of the subsidiary body. I felt so proud, actually, and also getting to know the delegation led by our minister and also Dr. Naim and yourself. And I think even before, there was a lot of dialogue and discussion of, coming for us together for the, indigenous peoples representative and the Malaysian government delegation, and sat down with YB at that time. We were sitting down and I had posed this. There was a lot of drama heading up towards the subsidiary body. There were many countries that were against this, except for Malaysia. And I actually appreciated, I learned a lot from Dr. Naim. We had also discussions about it because I wanted to know what is the government's perspective. And it was really good that the government was really supportive, but I also had to learn, as you mentioned, the common yet differentiated responsibilities. So understanding where Malaysia sits with the ASEAN and other Asian governments. So I remember I sat down with you, we talked about it, and I had asked for the support for the Malaysian delegation led by you. How can we talk to the opposing Asian governments? And the Malaysian delegation, actually, you opened the door for us. You helped arrange a meeting, and that was very difficult to get because prior, we were trying to get meetings with the opposing Asian states. They didn't want to meet up with us until the Malaysian government opened the door and said, oh, this is someone we were like, and they came. It was amazing. All the opposing Asian governments, we came, we couldn't find we couldn't find a actual room. We ended up sitting on the grass. You had like representatives from Asia, Japan, India, China, all sitting on the grass. We actually missed out India because they were coming, but they couldn't find us. And we had a productive dialogue, and we also listened to them. And it was also a good experience for me because it was important for us to hear the perspectives from the opposing governments. Why do you oppose this? And understanding it's not necessarily against indigenous peoples and local communities, but they also had concerns. So that was a really productive dialogue. And of course, there was a lot of discussions happening, but I do believe it was that small part, but small yet significant part from the Malaysian delegation that really changed their minds. So towards the end, when they had all the discussions, and yeah, it was the Asian governments that said, oh, we decided to support this after all. We want this permanent subsidiary body, and everybody also fell in line, Russia and all. I felt so proud as a Malaysian. It felt like it was not just for indigenous peoples and local communities, but also the countries and governments who supported us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rubis. Marvelous indeed, sir.
Sorry, I haven't finished. So that was my big, is it already okay to continue? So I want to explain as well the ICCA Consortium. It's a global movement association for indigenous community and conserved areas. So the question was around like how is the support for communities who have conserved areas that sit outside protected areas or other privately owned areas. I think what we're seeing now, because of the permanent subsidiary body, before the permanent subsidiary body, we had Article 8J that was an ad hoc working group for 20 years. So it was already in existence. We've had the meetings. I was actually, we already had the Malaysian, our first indigenous co-chair for Article 8J. That was me in last year in Geneva. But that was for the ad hoc working group. So now we have the subsidiary body. And what it means for indigenous peoples and local communities is that now we have a body that has more resources that are directed towards it. And as we had mentioned to, like, also, I mean, the Malaysian government understands it, but to the opposing governments, it's about how do we support you also delivering the MB subs. This is for us to work together, understanding that we all agree. The reason why we're at the CBD is that we all agree on the global framework for conservation. We agree about the MB subs. Now it's like, how do we support each other in this process? So I think explaining it to them that way, showing that we are actually on the same page, as Dr. Naim said, common yet differentiated responsibilities. How do we support you? And the science is there. I mean, like, indigenous peoples and local communities have been conserving, you know, and we have, I mean, there's proof. We manage about 38 million kilometers squared in 87 countries. So that's at least 40% of the global protected areas that are state-led. So also 17% of the world's land is conserved uniquely by indigenous peoples outside the state and privately governments. From the Malaysian perspective, from Sarawak perspective, I give an example of Batang Ai and Lajak and Timau for the Iban communities. So they've been conserving orangutans because of, you know, they had their own protocols, their own cultural governance around this. Before the protected area was established for the orangutan conservation. So already we have indigenous peoples and local communities conserved areas already happening in Malaysia, and that's been actively working. So we can talk about it later, but I'm interested in how do we start getting those numbers? So then we can also show and demonstrate, not just to the government, but also globally, that Malaysia has been doing so much already with very little resources. So how much can we do if we have more resources, you know, coming from the global north to support us? Thank you.
Thank you again. Exactly as pointed out, meaning to say the recognitions under this Article 8Js or PLC is timely in the sense that even Dr. June Rubis, even for under NRES or under the spearheading of YB, is about walking the talk, meaning to say action speaks louder than words. And as what been mentioned earlier on, the 70% of the locals, communities or indigenous peoples are directly involved in sustaining the biodiversity of orangutan in Batang Ai, as put it out. That is among many examples. I'm sure there's more. Later we will see how we can highlight few more later on. But now let's move to the next panel. I guess I go by a flip-flop, I guess. So it should be to my left, immediate left, Professor Emeritus Dr. Mazlin Mokhtar. Right. Again, probably as a start, just to paraphrase a lot of things, is that the overviews of this COP16 outcome, having attended the event itself, how would you view the outcomes in the form of perspective, much more focused, which is SDS and Asia, the solution. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Lonnie. Number one, Nik Nazmi, Minister. Hello, panelists. Datuk Deputy Sekjen, Puan Deputy Sekjen, His Excellency, Ambassador, Datuk Pengarah, Datuk Kadir, professors, researchers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, thank you, Mr. Lonnie, for the kind introduction. Thank you, NRES, for inviting SDSN. So my perspective, that was my first ever COP attendance. My God, Cali, Colombia was so far away. 30 hours sitting on a flight, sakit punggung. But it was worth it. So in the perspective of UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, we were very happy. As you can see from our name, it is about looking out for solutions to issues and problems together. So when I arrived in Colombia, it was nighttime 25th. The next day, 26th, I registered myself and wandered about. I was so fortunate to bump into Dr. Naim and Mr. Pascal Dagang. I nampak Pascal dulu. I said, MPOB. I say, MPOB? Dia pusing. Dan I nampak Dr. Naim datang jalan. Dr. Naim, boleh tak tengok kalau saya boleh jumpa Yang Berhormat? So he arranged a meeting. Thank you, YB Minister. We met briefly on the 28th of October at the ASEAN Pavilion. That was about 30 minutes before a very historic session, which first time UNSDSN brought together the meeting of 3 science panels. So this is really something special. UNSDSN, we were formed in 2012 when Ban Ki-moon was Secgen. So it was launched in 2012. Malaysia was among the first country to have a Malaysia chapter SDSN. Tan Sri Zakri was heading the Malaysia chapter for 9 years. About 2021, Tan Sri Zakri handed over to Tan Sri Jeffrey Chia. And that's why the third office of SDSN is in Kuala Lumpur, in charge of Asia and Pacific. First office, New York, second office, Paris, third one here. But if you look out for SDSN, we are very ambitious. We would like to help regions and countries to achieve SDG, 17 SDGs. Not easy to talk, but not easy to implement. So that's the spirit. And also to fulfill all our obligations under the Paris Climate Agreement. So that's the idea. So if you notice, there were comprehensive initiatives and programs under SDSN. FABLE, forest, agriculture, biodiversity, land use, energy. One of the things that they launched recently is the setting up of Science Panel. Science Panel is to help and advise government and stakeholder try to find solutions at local, national, regional level. So the first Science Panel that was established was Science Panel of the Amazon. This was launched at the COP26, Glasgow. If you Google, you may find the report, Science Panel Amazon Assessment Report, 1,000 pages, 34 chapters. If you don't have it, I can forward to you before you go to sleep at night, good material for you to go to sleep. But anyway, then when that report was launched, it brought together 250 scientists from 9 countries nearby Amazon. So the idea is, researcher, professors, university, research institutes, we had done good work long time. But sometimes it's a shock sendiri. We publish and that's it. Nothing happened. But when President Lula wants to come back as a second-time president, Jeff Sachs, the president of SDSN, approached Lula and gave this idea about the science panel. And Lula brought that into his manifesto. And fair enough, he won, and now he's the president second time. And the first thing he launched was the Rainforest OPEC, Brazil, Indonesia, Congo. And later on, we hope Malaysia and all to join in. But learning from that science panel, SDSN managed to bring much more funding from philanthropists and donors to do more good work in the Amazon. And it continued, and Amazon panel presented work every year at COP meetings. But COP28 last year, Congo Basin followed, and they launched, soft launch, Congo Basin assessment report soft launch. But they will have a full launch of that report next year, COP30, Belém, Brazil. Now, SDSN looks at global, What are the forest ecosystems that can help absorb carbon dioxide? There they see Amazon, Congo Basin, Borneo. Actually, we wanted to form Science Panel Southeast Asia, but we thought rather than move straight into 10 countries, maybe we look at existing strength. And we saw part of Borneo. 2007 it was launched. So that's why we talked to Jeff Sachs and our Prof. Wu, why don't we move with that first? So that's why now we set up Science Panel Borneo. Alhamdulillah, we managed to rally support from about 12 universities in Malaysia and Kalimantan, including University Institute Pertanian Bogor and Universitas Indonesia. Alhamdulillah, we have launched this science panel constituting co-leaders coming from Malaysia and Indonesia. We have 7 clusters. Cluster number 1 is about geography and geology. Cluster number 2 is about flora. 3, fauna. 4, social well-being and cultural diversity. 5 is about water and minerals, and then we have economics. So very comprehensive. And we did a soft launch of Science Panel Borneo at COP29. 10 hari, 10 days after coming home from Colombia, I rest a little bit and then took a flight again to Azerbaijan. You came second week, YB. I was in the first week with Dr. Ching Tu. We launched the Science Panel Borneo at Indonesia Pavilion on the 15th November, 1 p.m. 4 p.m., we returned to Malaysia Pavilion. We have a panelist discussion. So the idea, Science Panel, is to support government, business, NGO, the people of regions and countries to balance development and environment. So we are not anti-development. We are very much to development, but it must be in a balanced way. And to do that, we believe science must come into good decision-making and policy-making. So that's the idea. And that science is not only STEM, but it also encompasses social science and humanity. So very ambitious. So it is Science Panel for Biodiversity Protection and for Sustainable Development. And in Colombia, the first time 3 panels meet face-to-face. Science Panel Amazon, Science Panel Congo Basin, Science Panel Borneo. We were hosted at the Jeff Pavilion. What's beautiful about COP16, I saw many pavilions. There were pavilions about Positive Nature Pavilion. It was run by all the top-notch auditing and accounting firms. And then there's a pavilion, Business for Nature. So everybody, when sometimes I sat in this special session at various pavilions, we saw captains of industry and businesses, they talk about, we need to help to conserve biodiversity in Amazon, Congo, and Borneo. They liked it. So now we got to explore how perhaps the carbon market that we are setting up nowadays, what would be the currency? And I sat in the African Nature Positive session. They are looking at VNU, Verifiable Nature Units. We can talk about that later. So at the moment, a few companies are controlling the way of verifying and validating carbon. That's Vera and gold standards. But other entities are also exploring other currency for nature measurement. That's all for now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Lengthy and very informative. The facts of the matter is that we're talking about basin. Basin meaning you say to absorb the carbon dioxide. Definitely we're talking about Amazon, vast size, and of course the African continents of the Congo just now, and not least, which is what we should be proud of as a Malaysian, meaning to say is a Borneo, where it is also as an absorbent to the carbon dioxide. When you talk about sustainability and the name of development, as well as to sustain the environment itself. Right. Thank you. Very lengthy. And last and not least, for the first round. After this, I have to shift a little bit gear for the second round. Right, Mr. Shai. The first question. Integrating biodiversity into corporate strategy, being in the business, as mentioned by Professor earlier on, he mentioned about the business sides. We don't have the science with the empiricals, data and whatnot to support, because number doesn't lie. And of course, here we are about the role to be played by the business sector. What would be the responsibility when it comes to conserving in terms of aligning its operations towards the global biodiversity goals set at COP16, and what steps should be taken in order to minimize its impacts on biodiversity from the business view. To you, Mr. Shai.
Thank you, Mr. Lorne, Your Excellency Minister, Your Excellency Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen. I think before I answer your question, I think we need to acknowledge that there is already a shift by governments and multilateral agreements especially the Convention on Biological Diversity, because in acknowledging the role of businesses in the whole of society approach to address the biodiversity crisis. And then we can see this clearly in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, especially in its one of the 23 targets. There's one target especially for businesses, target 15, to assess and disclose the dependencies and impacts of businesses on biodiversity. And this is pivotal because this is very important because this is the first time in the history of CBD there is a target specifically for business to implement and to achieve in a way. And if you see the history of CBD, the first mention of business in its decision was in 2006 in COP, if I'm not mistaken, either COP 7 or 8, and then COP 10 during Aichi targets before we go before Kunming. We had a few mention of businesses, but for Kunming-Montreal GBF, it's very clear what we businesses need to do. And going back to the question, and I think the first thing that businesses can do is to align, to understand what the Kunming-Montreal GBF means to them. And this, I think we can do this in the context of the national policy on biological, our 𝐏𝐸𝐾 or NPBD, because as has mentioned many times today that Malaysia is the first to align itself with the GBF, which is huge when it was launched last year, October, because whenever I'm in panels or in discussions with my business peers, internationally or locally, I will mention that because we are the first in ASEAN and probably the 8th in the world. That's big. I think that's number one. You do need to understand how it aligns, and the only way to align, make that understanding is to go to the NPBD because it's aligned with the GBF. So in a way, when you align with the NPBD, you will be aligned with the GBF. And then the next one, I think you need to also move beyond business as usual, because there is a need to adopt a change in mindset. Because to address this, you have to have this collective actions. I think it has to be from business, from IPLC, from NGOs, from academia, government especially. And businesses, as you know, do own lands. And with that, I think we can become agents of change and stewards of biodiversity, because especially in areas under our direct operational control. And from this, we can do, minimizing our impacts from our operations. We can also invest in restoration and restoration projects. We can promote sustainable consumption. And very importantly, when you address climate change, we need to address climate change and biodiversity crisis together. It is no longer silos. I've been to one during COP16. There's one event by WBCSD where there is a proposal to have one COP, although that is impossible because I think since 1992 that we have tried that won't happen. And I think I've been in this biodiversity space for quite some time. That is not something new. That has been, we are trying to do one, cannot, because they have different objectives, and we do need to address, but I think now COP30 is coming next year for UNFCCC. I think that's where everyone has to work together as well to address both, because usually whenever we talk about nature and biodiversity, that's the forgotten cousin of climate change. We always forget about biodiversity. And I'm an ecologist by nature. So whenever they say it, I feel very emotional sometimes, like, have you forgotten about the tigers and elephants? So those are the things that I think businesses can do. And to take the spirit of Target 15, which is already in our NPBD as well, you need to assess and disclose your impacts and dependencies on biodiversity. And we have a lot of existing frameworks, like the new TNFD framework that was launched last year in September, which is again, a cousin to TCFD. Everyone has relatives these days. So in a way, when you address, you need to see, when you start to disclose and you start to report on your dependencies and impacts, you see it as an opportunity to do more positive actions, not to see it as a burden or as a stop to do good things. Because sometimes when you do all these disclosures, you will find some gaps in those, in your operations. That is actually a good way to address your impacts. And when you know what needs to be done, it's better than you don't know. So, yeah.
Right. Thank you again from the business. Because we're talking business, can't run away from corporate social responsibility, the CSR. Yeah, that shall complete our first round. And now I shall move back to Yang Mohamad. I think I shall give more time for Yang Mohamad to reflect on what has Malaysia gained in terms of achievement as spelled out during the conclusion by Dr. Naim earlier on, my fellow colleagues. So probably I'd like to have a reflection being first for the COP16. I'm sure there is also a back-to-back of COP29 after Cali, then it was Baku in Azerbaijan. And that, I'm sure, gives a more holistic to Yang Berbahagia. Probably you share your view in terms of the outcomes expected or what we aspire in the context of Malaysia can gain from this COP16. To you, Yang Mohamad.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is my first COP, because the first, or rather COP15, the one in Montreal, it took place during the election and then the swearing in of the new government. So I think I was in communication with I think Tan Sri Zakri at that time, but I was still trying to understand my brief because it was very, very new. But anyway, so I think the point of that we tend to not recognize biodiversity and nature as part of fighting the planetary crisis. I think that's something that is very real. And this is where, I really, we cannot emphasize enough. This is where Malaysia actually can provide solutions to the world because of what we have, being a mega diverse country. So I think, yes, we all know that there were things that I think we were hoping to achieve, but we did not achieve at COP. But among the important things is, of course, the establishment of the permanent subsidiary body for the IPLC, the 8J clause, which is very, very significant. And I think, yes, it wasn't an easy decision for many member states, but as far as Malaysia is concerned, we have our experience working with our indigenous people, and we know how crucial the role of the indigenous people in protecting the environment. And if you do not involve the indigenous people, if it goes wrong, there might be people who use them for the wrong purposes. So I think it's important to keep them as part of the solution. And that, I think, is, of course, something that is significant. Then the establishment of the Kali Fund for sharing benefits from the digital sequence information for genetic resources. That is also very crucial because we have, the access and benefit sharing principles were established previously, but now with digital sequencing and whatnot, there were countries that were trying to sort of, saying, oh, this is something else and it shouldn't apply. So I think putting it in is very, very important. And I think, because climate change is the flavor of the month or the year, or the decade or whatever, right? And I think putting that link between climate change and biodiversity conservation is very, very crucial. Not just that, even in terms of health, we tend to forget that COVID-19, it happened because of there was a lack of buffer between nature and mankind. That buffer was destroyed, and all these infectious diseases, spread, and we will encounter it more. And it's both a biodiversity problem as a climate change problem as we proceed. So I think putting that link is very, very critical. And I think I have to give credit to Colombia. The voice, the determination for especially Minister Susana and the Colombian government to voice out the needs of mega diverse developing countries. And I think that is where it was easy for Malaysia to support what you were doing because we felt that this is something that tends to be overlooked about what can be done. And again, I think that's where we are hopeful when we have the other COP going to South America next year, COP for UNFCCC COP in Belém in Brazil, because we believe that the link between biodiversity and climate change will be emphasized and how it should be seen from the perspective of developing countries that are also vocal about the needs of indigenous people. So I think that is something that is promising as we move forward.
Okay, YB, may I retain the mic on YB again? Another question that I'd like to pose to YB would be, in order for the realizations of these outcomes, definitely it takes two to tango. In what way we're talking about would be from the levels of developed nations, being the one that where most of the resources will come from, as well as the developing countries where most of these mega diverse biodiversity premise located. So, if possible, what would be the ideas that we think that the role that can be played by both parties? Maybe we shed some insight on this as well. Yeah, thank you.
When we talk about climate change, I think there is a greater realization of climate justice now. There's talk of the loss and damage fund, and now the latest financing, 300 billion US dollars a year plus 1 trillion and all that. But when it comes to nature, there has been, I mean, we Malaysia also, we have received benefits from this, but it pales in comparison. And I think, that is something that people have to acknowledge, because if you look at how many developed countries, how they have been able to achieve their level of development, how they have been able to achieve their level of wealth, it was on the back of the natural resources, not only in their own countries, but also in the back of our own countries, right? So I think that basic principle, is that they owe it to the developing countries. And, you can't just, after all that, you have the developed world achieving your living standards today, and then you turn around and then you tell us, okay, you can't do this, you can't do that to protect nature. We do not deny, right? I mean, I don't think, the climate change denier is not in the developing world, right? It's the president of a country, but of a developed country. But the issue is, we recognize the responsibility, we recognize, I mean, Malaysia, we recognize that we need to protect this, and it comes at a huge cost, but we need that just solution so that, as I said, you go to pockets in Peninsula, but especially in Borneo, especially among the indigenous communities, poverty is still rampant. They need jobs, they need development. So just by saying, don't cut down trees and all that, it might have an immediate impact in terms of their immediate job prospects. So how do we go about that while maintaining and preserving the nature? So I think that is where the conversation needs to happen. And I think that, we will continue to speak up on that. And I think that what we have today, you have that recognition, realization in climate change, but in terms of biodiversity, it's not enough. The conversation is not enough yet. And I think that is where, and my hope is that when we are able to, next year we are doing our COP climate change in Belém, we are able to bring that conversation, because I think with the theme that was brought up, I think it was not just the minister, but also the Colombian president. He was being very, very vocal in his jeans and shirt at the opening. I wish I could wear that. But we, that momentum, I think, and Minister, what do you call that, Marina de Silva from Brazil was there as well, and we sat with Minister Susana and myself, we sat on the same panel. So I think that solidarity between the developing world that have been endowed with enormous natural wealth, I think that will be important as we go forward to Belém next year.
Thank you for that insights and the aspirations. Meaning to say it doesn't stop or doesn't end in Baku or Bali for that matter. It is a continuous effort in order for us to sustain and pass it on to our next generations to appreciate the biodiversity of this Mother Earth. Right. Time is just a short on our side here. I'm not so sure. I'm sure hopefully it's the same with the audience. I need to move on to the panel, the next panel. So what I do here is that I will lump the question and to wrap it up for each panel. Only then I pass it back to Yang Berhormat for the closure with Letter Anna before we move to Q&A session, if at all. Right, Dr. June. Question here, probably again is more on the roles of how to support having that landslide victory, and how would that be translated into on the ground, meaning to say for them to aware that they have a voice now in a structured manner rather than residing on a particular parties, support of local communities and the importance of them in bioscience, especially in passing on this traditional knowledge. So how would that be sustained in the future, and how can that be further amplified in the next COP17 as been a most immediate one? Yeah, pass to you, Dr.
Thank you so much. Well, I just want to start off by saying that I don't take it very lightly that I'm sitting next to a minister and also with our distinguished panelists and talking to all of you as a representative of the IPLC and also as the caucus. It's a huge honor, and I feel really humbled with this opportunity. But for me, it also shows the Malaysian government's foresight in understanding IPLC as a force globally. You see IPLC's campaigning in all these main COPs and conventions. They're making a huge difference. But I love your caution. If they're not with us, they're against us, sort of thing. So, like, how do we make sure that IPLCs, particularly from a national level, that we are working closely with? I give an example of the Green Climate Fund and the GEF. Even the loss and damage, they're always including indigenous peoples and local communities' voices. So the question goes as well as how do we ensure that we also work together? I also agree with our minister's viewpoint about how do we ensure, for example, the global south developing countries are also getting more than the fair share of benefits, but considering that we're holding the brunt of what is happening now, climate change and biodiversity loss. So in the context of the CBD, there's an important term that's important for IPLCs, which is the indigenous and traditional territories. So that is something to think about when we think about target 3, which is the 30 by 30. How do we conserve the world by 2030 with 30% conserved? So we have protected areas. We have, like, for example, the OECMs. These could be like privately owned or even company owned in some ways. But now we also have the ITTs, or, which is we can say the ICCA, so the community conserved areas. So what does it mean for Malaysia? I mean, particularly for the Sabah and Sarawak context, I guess I'm not quite sure if I can talk about the West Malaysian context. We do recognize native customary lands, but to an extent. I think there has to be more room for improvement in regards of like also recognizing not just, for example, the Pulau Galau, which is like our conserved areas, but also recognizing that the other parts of the customary lands. Because the Pulau Galau or conserved areas, that's like the heart. That's the heart of community conserved areas. And before you can conserve the heart, you have to also conserve lands around it, but also the customary, the governance practices. This is why, so there are a couple of things that I would like propose. For example, I am the co-chair of documenting territories for the ICCA Consortium. I'm on the board for the ICCA registry, which is based in Cambridge, with a WCMC charity. And we do registry of the ICCA of community conserved areas, because we have to know how many lands our indigenous peoples are actually conserving. So I would like to, perhaps with the support with the government, can we look at maybe establishing a registry? And I think we have the numbers already. We just need to start, having an idea how many lands are already conserved by communities, however they want to describe it. If they sit outside the protected areas or they sit outside the OECMs. I think it would be really good to have indigenous representatives be part of the formulation of the guidelines for the OECM on the national level, so then we can give our perspectives as well. There was also a lot of talk about capacity building, and I completely agree. So for my part, because I report back also to the Jaringan Orang Asli Malaysia, so I let them know, like what's happening on the CBD level and how we can also talk about our rights and interests through the CBD process. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and there's good examples, for example, in the ASEAN context. So the Philippines has passed the ICCA bill. So they recognize the community conserved areas from a national level, and they recognize it as environmental critical areas, so not subject to any land conversion or land use. So this is something that Malaysia can also do if they so choose. But also I'm sitting next to, like a Petronas here. I just had a conversation with your boss, and I think one of the things we do have to start discussing from indigenous peoples and local communities, as much as we don't like it, is also how do we engage with the carbon markets? Because we have to recognize, for example, Sarawak is also passing their own state laws around carbon markets. So we have to engage, but also in a very effective level so that, that we're all on the same level. And I think this is where the ministry plays a huge role, because you open doors, you facilitate discussions. Petronas as well also opens doors and facilitate discussions. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to work together, also with the conservation NGOs and then with academia, that we could make this a reality for the nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. June. Right, I move on to Prof. Emeritus Dr. Mazlin. Number doesn't lie, and a lot of empirical data. The introductions of science applications in terms of how we interpret and as well as how we can plan in achieving our target in more quantifiable manner rather than in a qualitative manners. Again, probably how we like to interject the role of science and data in biodiversity action. And of course, I straight away move on to that will also include the capacity building on that particular premise, while there might be a limitations or constraint. So what's your take on the roles of science in order for us to sustain the biodiversity?
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Lonnie. Ladies and gentlemen, moving forward, yes, science, data, technologies are important. I'd like to pick up from the point of YB Minister saying that, let's not do it only nationally, but regionally. I also like to take the call by side saying that, nowadays biodiversity cannot be treated on its own. There are nexus. So biodiversity, water nexus, water, food, energy nexus, everything is interconnected. Syukur Alhamdulillah in Malaysia, particularly with reference to SDSN again, For the past 8-9 years already, SDSN, the Paris office, they will publish the SDG performance, right, of countries. And we know the ranking of Malaysia is not so good, maybe. But never mind, we have the resources, we can work together. So, talking about your call for regional efforts. So coming January, Malaysia is going to be the chairman of ASEAN. So we hope that anything pertaining to natural resource and environment, Yang Berhormat Nik Nazmi, I think you will lead the special efforts. So we hope the call is, never mind, indigenous local communities, you are already in the agenda, but we also hope you bring the scientists and researchers, bring good science data into good decision making, and with your support, discussion in ASEAN Pavilion in Colombia, we can try to build the science panel for Southeast Asia, inshallah. And coming back, even though we begin with Science Panel Borneo, definitely we do not forget CFS, Central Forest Spine, and the CTI. So definitely in our region, Southeast Asia particularly, oceans and water play a crucial role. And how water gets connected with energy, with food systems and other systems. So very complicated, but we do believe that with the input of good research and all the eminent thinkers, we can work with government, NGOs, CSOs and all that, and business sector. And if you look at Malaysia, Malaysia gives attention to biodiversity and SDGs seriously. We have the Malaysian SDG Council, and the steering committee is at the Economy Ministry, but the steering committee comprising all the important ministries of the government and also CSO and NGO. So definitely Malaysia, we are already working together. It's just a matter of how to bring things together. And Department of Statistics Malaysia is the information gatherer. But coming back to capacity building and capability building. So definitely SDSN. If you Google SDSN, you try to Google SDG Academy. At the moment, we have 2,000 members throughout the world. 95% are universities and research institutes. These are where knowledge are generated and shared. And SDG Academy will bring a lot of online courses, again, for training of not only students and formal education, but local authority leaders, district officer and all that. So, YB, if we are very strong already among the government officers, how to strengthen the environmental governance between federal and state, because we know that in Malaysia, Bio-D and natural resources are under state. From state, how do you bring down to district level and local authority? Of course, local authority, you issue the licenses for businesses. This is an opportunity of how we can bring the agenda of Bio-D into planning, including planning for development, planning for businesses development. You attach the requirement for Bio-D mainstreaming there. But anyway, a lot to be done, but we hope before we go for COP30, so that YB Minister, you can report on next year. If we can have also the science panel for Southeast Asia, that would be wonderful. Yeah, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you again, Professor, for the insights on the data. And last and not least, for this round, the final round, yes, Mr. Hazari, been in Petronas as one of the company whereby you have a lot of resources when it comes to financial. And this is where the demands or the perceptions of the publics, what would be the corporate social responsibility in investing in biodiversity, and what would be the planning that you have in related to that, contributing to the global efforts. And of course, again, looking into Petronas, we're talking Petronas is equivalent to hydro or carbon emissions. And of course, that has to be translated into a greener energy. I'm sure that is something in the pipeline, so probably able to enlighten us further in terms of the plannings for the next, the next short-term or long-term periods that that you can share with us in terms of biodiversity conservation? What's you?
Yeah,
Mr. Shari.
thank you for the very interesting question. I think in Petronas, as the national oil and gas company, we are committed to addressing the dual challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss through, as you know, through a combination of emission reduction initiatives, investments in renewable energy and biodiversity conservation efforts. And if you, and as everyone knows as well, Petronas executes these challenges by having the Petronas Energy Transition Strategy. And one of the strategy is to have a commitment towards a net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And under that commitment, we do consider nature and biodiversity as material topic for Petronas. And I think everyone knows about our commitments to this net zero pathway, but when we talk about nature and biodiversity, it's sometimes it's hard to also comprehend how this relates to an oil and gas company. But in Petronas, because of the importance of nature and biodiversity to our operations, in July of 2022, right before, I think a few months before Kunming, Montreal GBF, in December of 2022, our board approves the Petronas position on nature and biodiversity. And then that is when it becomes our policy moving forwards. And at this point, from there as well, we have, we established in March of last year, the Nature and Biodiversity Center of Excellence, where I'm from, where we implement and try to mainstream nature and biodiversity via the position in our operations from top right to the bottom. And just to explain a little bit on the position, we have 5 areas of actions. And 2 areas of actions I want to emphasize here, where we establish voluntary exclusion zone, where we, from 1st January of 2024 of this year, that we have committed that we will not have any new projects in UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And that is to acknowledge that we value the universal values of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. And then we also have an area of action regarding the managing nature and biodiversity risk. And from there, we apply the risk-based approach on the implementation of the position. And we now have started in 2023, we started to this biodiversity and ecosystem services risk profiling for all our operational sites. And then from there, we categorize these sites whether they are high risk or very high risk to nature and biodiversity, because we do need to understand our relationship with nature. And it's not really easy, because when it comes to oil and gas, it's not as straightforward as plantation, for example. Plantation, because they depend on biodiversity so much, but we don't. So that's where we need to understand that before we proceed with the action plans to address the impacts and dependencies. So from there as well, once we, to show that the leadership and commitment of Petronas, in June of this year, we, the board again approved the new Petronas sustainability approach, because that one to steer the strategic direction of the enterprise with the desired outcome of creating sustainable value through responsible governance. And from there, you can see there's 3 pillars. I think all this you can read them in our Petronas integrated report, where there's 3. 1 is delivering net zero, second is thriving with nature, and the third is fostering just transition. So when you talk about thriving with nature, we recognize the impact and dependencies of our operations. That one is very clear. We're very transparent on that. And then we also commit to use natural resources responsibly and promote circularity practices and address nature and biodiversity loss. And that's why the position also supports the aim of the GBF, CBD, and also the NPBD and all other biodiversity policies of the countries that we operate in. And mind you, we operate in 32 countries. So that's where the complexity is also, because different countries will have different interpretations. And that's where the position will steer our moving forwards, especially when it comes to nature and biodiversity. Because as you know, climate is, we are talking about one atmosphere here. But when it comes to nature and biodiversity, it will happen at the local level. What happens in Malaysia is different in what happens in our operation in Australia or Canada or South Sudan or Iraq. So that's where I think the Petronas board and our management is very clear that we do need to address nature and biodiversity, and the position is very clear on this. And also our new sustainability approach. So those two documents actually are very important to our operation.
Okay, noted. And thank you for just substantive matters being addressed. Okay. Right. I know it's almost time. I mean, it's lunch time coming, and the drums on the stomach is getting louder. But just before we move back to, past the last to YB, some urgents on technology. One or less than 1 minute, probably, Prof, you can share. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Lonnie. The usage of satellite technology, GIS, remote sensing. I think this is very pertinent. So in August, I was in the same panel with some of the senior directors of Indonesia Space Agency. So we talked to him. Yes, Indonesia Space Agency would like to contribute further into the science panel program, monitoring, tracking biodiversity loss and expansion of protected areas and all that. So imagine we use eye in the sky, which can help we get good data and can come to handphone so that DO, district officer, local authority, and we can have a look like we look at �my 𝐿𝐿 for public health. Imagine we have equivalent �my for river, for forest, for everything inside the phone. So these are the kinds of things that we need to bring technology into good data,
Definitely.
monitoring and reporting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Prof, for another insight on technology as a platform for us to leverage when it comes to maintaining the conservation as well as biodiversity. Right. Last and not least, finally, YB, I can't close this without something as a takeaway for the audience. Could it be for the future COP30 in Belém, Brazil, for this UNFCCC, or could it be as well for COP17 in Yerevan, Armenia? Anything that, another contribution, another milestone that probably that been planned, and something that we can highlight as one of the mega diverse country. To you, maybe.
Thank you. I'll be very short because of lunch. I think, there's a lot of policies, there's a lot of frameworks and whatnot, the details. But I think one of the things that I tried to understand when I came in the ministry, you have climate change, you have biodiversity, and you have this whole glossary of abbreviations and alphabet soups that you try to make sense of. But it all goes down to something that is actually very close to mankind. There's this famous quote that I like to repeat by Gus Path, the American environmentalist, that he used to think that the problem of the planet is about biodiversity loss, it's about climate change, it's about pollution. But he came to realize that really it's a problem of greed and apathy. And that is where lawyers and scientist, in his words. I'm a lawyer, so it's okay for the scientists. Lawyers and scientists do not have the solutions to that. And I think if you go back, obviously if you go back to our religions, our faith, in Islam, we believe that the Prophet was sent down as a blessing, not to mankind, but as to creation. Right? So it's a very broad definition. If I think the Pope has been writing a lot of pieces on climate change, on the environment, which is very profound. But even if you go, obviously, back to the indigenous communities, the Iroquois Constitution, this is the first nation in America and Canada, in the North America. One of the things that was very profound, that in their constitution, they mentioned that a responsibility of the current generation is about passing it to the next generation. And I think if we go back to that, because if you just rely on science, you rely on politics, you rely on economics, that is ambivalent. It can be good, it can be bad. You have the nuclear bomb and you have nuclear energy, right? But if the moral principles, the direction is very clear, then everything else will follow through. So when you want to talk about how do you do your business, how do you design your policies, it's easier. So I think that is something that is crucial so that we can continue to achieve progress when it comes to what we want to achieve in biodiversity protection, when it comes to climate change, fighting pollution, and so on and so forth. So I think that is, to me, is the most important thing, as the easiest way to understand all this. And you do not have to remember what 𝐏𝐚𝐫𝐿 is or, all these abbreviations are. So that's my short preview to lunch.
Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause, a great one, for all the panels, for very lively, I would say, substantive matters. Thank you. So that have come to enclosure. I shall pass it to MC for the next task. Thank you.